attempts to claim over 20 million lives.
Welcome to WatchMojo.com, and today we're counting down our picks for the top 10 worst epidemics in history.
As for adults, those born before 1957 probably got the measles because there was no vaccine back then.
For this list, we're looking at plagues, pandemics, and other scourges of disease that spread through the human population like wildfire, killing millions.
The disease permanently scarred both his body and his mind.
We're not necessarily ranking them based on how many people were killed by the plagues, but those figures definitely play into our choices.
There were areas where outbreaks had occurred where the rat flea was not there to transmit, but nevertheless they had a bubonic plague outbreak.
Number 10, the third cholera pandemic.
By morning, my father was very sick. He had diarrhea that looked like rainwater and poured out of him.
The unlucky victims of this disease suffered through hellish final days, with diarrhea, vomiting, and resulting dehydration being the main symptoms.
This is the emergency area where the patient first come. If the patient has severe dehydration is a medical emergency.
With the most deaths of any 19th century epidemic, the third cholera pandemic began in India and spread across Asia, Europe, North America, and Africa to countries like Russia, where over 1 million people died.
So in a matter of days, you might have 10 people infected, then 100 people, then 500 people. One person in 5 will get severe diarrhea. Without quick treatment, up to half of those people might die.
However, it took an outbreak of this severity for the cause of cholera to be found. In 1854, British doctor John Snow discovered that tainted water was to blame, and it was this breakthrough that eventually allowed officials to get control of the cholera pandemic.
First, we made the water safe. We filtered it through cloth and boiled it for 1 minute.
Number 9, the Asian flu pandemic of 1957.
We all missed it. The military missed it, and the World Health Organization missed it.
Though it can be confirmed that this outbreak of the influenza A virus started in China, the exact origins of the virus are contested, with one popular theory suggesting that a mutation in wild ducks joined together with a typical human strain to create the new disease. One of 3 flu pandemics during the 20th century, this one was the least deadly, with estimated global death figures ranging between 1 and 4 million. And that's likely due to the fact that a vaccine was created in 1957 that helped stem the rash of infections from this avian flu.
We had 40 million doses of vaccine by the time that the end of the year came.
Number 8, the World War I typhus epidemic.
Food was growing ever more scarce. The queues outside the bread shops stretched right down the length of the street.
Taking place during a time of incredible strife, this typhus outbreak was another devastating result of World War I, a disease caused by bacteria, whose symptoms include severe back pain and delirium. This particular outbreak originated with lice.
The perfect setup for epidemic. And then it struck. Typhus.
It was for this reason that delousing stations for the soldiers had been set up on the Western Front, which helped keep those troops healthy.
Next, the 40,000 Italians dwelling in the jam-packed air raid shelters were deloused.
However, the Eastern Front was not so lucky. By the time of its peak, between 25 and 30 million cases were reported across Soviet regions, with 3 million Russians and even more Poles and Romanians dying from infection.
In over 3 brutal years, 2,300,000 Russians have died. A further 5 million injured.
Number 7, Coco Litzli.
The Aztecs' crowning achievement was a gleaming capital city that astonished European explorers called the Venice of the New World.
This disease is categorized in a group of ailments called viral hemorrhagic fever, a family of illnesses that continues to attack humanity with viruses like Ebola.
It is in Monrovia's slums that Ebola is spreading fastest.
Affecting the Aztecs living in the region that would become Mexico twice in less than half a century, Coco Litzli decimated the population, infecting a group that was already reeling from other diseases brought to their shores by Spanish conquerors, and causing their numbers to dwindle by millions in less than a century. with symptoms that included a black tongue, dysentery, severe abdominal pain, and bleeding from your nose, eyes, and mouth. This Ebola-like epidemic annihilated what was once a thriving civilization.
The Aztec Empire had vanished, and with it, a legacy of astonishing engineering achievements.
Number 6, the Plague of Justinian.
This turns out to have been one of the most virulent pandemics in history.
A forebearer of a pandemic that will be featured later on this list, this plague is believed to have been brought to the Byzantine Empire and Constantinople specifically by infected rats traveling from Egypt on grain boats.
Some citizens blamed the plague on the Empress Theodora, saying it was a punishment from God for her sexual promiscuity.
An event that likely changed the course of European and Christian history. The plague of Justinian left the Byzantine Empire short of healthy citizens who could act as laborers or militaries, meaning the empire was severely weakened.
Symptoms would begin with a sudden fever, followed by chills, vomiting, and an increased sensitivity to light.
With some suggesting that at its peak, the mortality rate of this plague took 5,000 lives each day. The first wave of this disease eradicated 40% of Constantinople's population and continued to kill through several more waves in the years that followed.
If the future looked bleak for Europe before, now it looked pitch black.
Number 5, the Antonine Plague. The earliest pandemic on this list, this scourge came to the Roman Empire by way of soldiers returning from fighting in Western Asia. However, what form it took is up for debate, with some thinking smallpox or measles were to blame.
Symptoms start out with coughing, runny nose, and a high fever of 104 degrees. The rash appears 3 to 5 days later.
Though it wasn't as deadly as Justinian, with only 2,000 dying in Rome per day at its pinnacle, and likely 5 million succumbing to the disease in total. The fact that it most probably claimed the lives of 2 Roman emperors, Lucius Verus and Marcus Aurelius Antoninus, served to plunge the land into fear and chaos, and likely changed the course of history.
And the Emperor reaps the rewards.
Number 4, the third plague pandemic.
Every rat captured was examined for signs of disease. Anyone who brought in a rat, dead or alive, was paid 10 cents.
The third recorded iteration of the bubonic plague, after the plague of Justinian and the Black Death. This plague ravaged the world for over a century.
In 1900,
victim staggers about in his final moments. His speech is slurred, skin purple-black, covered with swollen, pus-filled lumps as death calls him. Witnesses to this terrifying spectacle called it the Dance Macabre, or Dance of Death. In the 14th century, a terrible catastrophe fell upon Asia, Europe, the Middle East, and North Africa that would change the course of history. The Black Death. The Black Death, or bubonic plague, was an outbreak of disease that killed 1/3 of the European population in the period 1347 to 1350. It had a similarly devastating impact in Asia, the Middle East, and North Africa. The disease played no favorites. Rich and poor, young and old, priest and peasant, all fell victim to this horrible and, at the time, unexplained sickness, which was spreading like wildfire. The populations of entire towns and villages were wiped out in a matter of days. The dead were buried in mass graves to cope with the rapid death toll. Only a thin covering of soil was placed over the dead bodies before another layer was buried on top. Pope Clement VI consecrated, made sacred, the Rhone River so corpses could be thrown straight into it. So, what is the Black Death? Where did it come from? While it's difficult to trace with any real certainty, the outbreak is believed to have originated in the Gobi Desert in Mongolia, early in the 14th century. Prior to this, the disease had existed for centuries in regions of Asia, with small outbreaks occurring from time to time. any one of these could have been the source. Once infected, the victim would first experience a high fever, aching limbs, and fatigue. Within days, the lymph nodes in the neck, armpits, and groin would start to swell and turn black. These black swellings are where the Black Death gets its name. Michael Placentius, first-hand witness to the horrors of the Black Death, wrote, "Here, not only the burn blisters appeared, but there have developed gland boils on the groin, the thighs, the arms, or on the neck. At first, these were the size of a hazelnut and developed accompanied by violent shivering fits, which soon rendered those attacks so weak that they could not stand up, but were forced to lie in their beds consumed by violent fever. Soon the boils grew to be the size of a walnut, then to that of a hen's egg or a goose's egg, and they were exceedingly painful and irritated the body, causing the sufferer to vomit blood. The sickness lasted 3 days, and on the 4th, the latest, the patient succumbed." The stinking pus-filled swellings, otherwise known as buboes, gave the bubonic plague its name. Their nervous system under attack, victims would become crazed and delirious with fever. Once the swollen lymph nodes started to burst within the body, the sufferer was not long for this world. Death usually occurred within the week. By the time the infected person who had introduced the disease to the port, town, or village died, others would already be in the early stages of infection. This made preventing an epidemic incredibly difficult. The outbreak of the Black Death in the 14th century actually involved 3 different strains of plague. The most common and visually the most gruesome form is the bubonic plague. The second form was the pneumonic plague. It infects the respiratory system once the bubonic strain reaches the lungs. The third form, septicemic plague, infects the body's circulatory system, that is, the blood. The bubonic plague is actually the weakest of the 3 strains. During the worst outbreaks of the Black Death, pneumonic and septicemic plague had mortality rates of almost 100%. It's believed malnutrition played a major role in making the symptoms more dramatic. Many who died had endured years of famine, the result of severe storms and drought, making their weakened immune system vulnerable.